is like I go back, I play other games after Elden Ring, and it's not even remotely close.
Elden Ring is a wake-up call. And no, I'm not talking about the players. This isn't a video about difficulty.
Yeah.
Well, that does actually come up at some point in time in the video. But Elden Ring does something incredibly unique, something very special, something that the rest of the upper echelon of the video game industry just can't seem to replicate. And that's come out with a holistic, high-quality title that delivers on the player's expectations for under $70, not once, but twice. Elden Ring...
It's a feature-complete game. Imagine that.
It isn't just a great game. It's a case study on what games should be or should strive to be. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. Elden Ring's Shadow of the Erdtree hit a peak concurrent player count of over 780,000 players. I want to point out just how absurd it is that this is a DLC expansion that's widely a single-player game that not only hit that high of a concurrent player count, but that's over 80% retention from the game's peak of its initial release, which was 950,000 players.
Think about how fucking insane that is. How absolutely fucking ridiculous it is that 80% of people came back to play a DLC that you can only get to if you beat one of the hardest bosses in the game.
To add to this,
and that's just on Steam.
Absurdity, the official Elden Ring Twitter account posted an image announcing over 5 million tarnished have entered into the realm of shadows.
Fucking insane.
We aren't even mentioning that according to Steam, at the time of this recording, only
and the
40...
thing is, like, you keep in mind that, like, Dragon's Dogma 2 sold, like, 2 or 3 million copies. And, like, that game was really well received. People really liked that game. This game is an expansion, and it almost doubled that.
80% of players have defeated Mohg to be even able to gain entrance into the DLC. With now both Elden Ring and its DLC claiming top spots in Steam's top sellers, and likely the same for each platform the game is now available on.
That's right.
It's safe to say that Elden Ring is a massive achievement, one that's not only worth appreciation, but study. However, it is my firm belief that the games industry leaders...
See, like, I don't even think that Elden Ring is... You don't need to study Elden Ring. All you need to do is think about how could you make a really good game based off of the same principles that people made Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. Because that's basically what happened. Is that the reason why, like, Elden Ring is almost like a time travel device to go back to the year 2000, the year 1995, Super Metroid, Castlevania, fucking Super Mario World.
Have no intention of paying attention because emulating the success of FromSoft and Miyazaki require humility, talent, and vision, all things seemingly bankrupt from many of today's modern games.
I'm really happy to see a lot of games that are like Souls-like games. They are starting to get good. I think that we've had a number of really great attempts this year. Like you had Inotria. I thought that one was pretty good. Another Crab's Treasure was pretty good. Lies of P was pretty good. Now it's better than Elden Ring. It's not better than Elden Ring. But it's pretty good.
Thing that I think is really well represented when we start to look back at the most influential games over the past couple of years, Elden Ring and Baldur's Gate 3, where when we compare these two, they become eerily similar.
Yeah.
You see a direct thread of unaccountable developers distancing themselves from products that they know that they can't make themselves. If you don't remember, AAA developers from both Ubisoft and...
I actually think that probably Elden Ring, like both of the studios, had constraints that they needed to operate under because that's the way business is. Like, they all have to operate and exist in the real world. It's just that they were able to overcome those constraints. And I bet if you ask the guys that made Elden Ring or the guys that made Baldur's Gate 3, there were probably things that they would have done if they had more time. But it's just that the product, they don't use that as an excuse, right? The product is good by itself anyway. Of course.
Games dogged on Elden Ring for getting a 97 on Metacritic and how it means that reviewers don't care about games UI.
Game reviewers don't give a flying fuck about my life is a lie. Yeah, it is. That sucks, right? It sucks, right? Your life is a lie. But that's just life. That's the way it is.
Developer unimpressed with the graphic stability and performance, and another one, well, from Horizon, talking about bad quest design. Now, in the case of Baldur's Gate 3, we had developers take a different approach. They used their imagination, realizing that they can't make players believe that, while something they enjoy is actually bad. They preemptively tried to distance themselves before the release of Baldur's Gate 3, painting the game as an incredibly unique set of circumstances, unable to be repeated, and an unfair standard for future games to be compared to. Calling the game Rockstar-level nonsense for scope, saying baseline comparisons are a damaging thing to use, and
I just love how people think that they can make the decision on what the audience likes. You don't get to do that. The audience does that. It's not up to you. And remember what I was saying before about how these developers want the reviewers to push forward narratives? This is one of those narratives. Because, as a customer, let me tell you something. You can have whatever opinion you want about media. Even if it's stupid, you are entitled to that opinion. You are entitled to being stupid.
My personal favorite from the Diablo 4 senior designer, Chris Balzer, saying, "But people too often look at the fruits of labor and not the labor itself. Same as it..."
You're right. Nobody gives a fuck about your labor. Nobody gives a fuck about how long it took you. Nobody gives a fuck about how many hours you worked. Nobody gives a fuck about how hard it was. Nobody gives a fuck about any of that. None of it matters to anybody except for you. Why are we getting into this parasocial, weird, cringe bullshit? Why would anybody care? That's not that. Do you give a fuck about, you get your food from McDonald's and it's wrong, and then the guy says, yeah, I had a headache, so I gave you the wrong order. Or are you going to be like, oh, okay, I guess I'm just going to eat the wrong food? No, you're going to want a fucking refund. It just doesn't work in any other fucking scenario in the entire world. Every other universe that nobody cares about how hard you worked. Do you know who cares about how hard they worked? Someone who's working hard on that thing at that moment in time that wants validation. Nobody else cares. It doesn't matter. Let me give you an example. Today, whenever I woke up, I had to deal with, I think, it was pretty good morning for me. One issue with, number of companies and things like that I'm involved with. Then I'm going to be streaming for the majority of my day. And I'm going to be streaming until I have a meeting later on in the evening tonight that I will have to go to. After I do that meeting, I will then have to do a follow-up meeting, probably about other things that are residual from that, and then also check in on my dad to make sure he doesn't need anything because he had some problem with his foot and everything. And so now it's 10 p.m. And so I've been awake ever since 11, and I'm doing this. And this, by the way, this is what day is it today? It's Wednesday. So it's not like this is some weird fucking situation. This is my life. This is my life. And then after that, I'll probably be doing other things as well. But nobody cares. Nobody gives a shit. People are just like, okay, well, when are you going to be on next? Because that's what matters. Nobody wants to hear a complainer. You go to the barber, you hear the barber complaining about his job, that sucks. There's never a point where this is normalized. Stop being a bitch. Just stop being such a fucking bitch. It's crazy.
Ever was, I guess. Same deal with people wondering why there are so few artists painting like Renaissance masters. Yes.
Wait, what? I guess same people wonder why there are so few artists painting like Renaissance. They were hated, though? It's just weird, bitch. It's just so stupid, bro. The reason why people aren't painting like Renaissance masters is because it's not the Renaissance anymore. That's the reason why, is that art was a product of its time.
Yes, Chris, we are wondering where the Renaissance masters were when you released Diablo 4, a 20-year-old franchise at this point that remained in turmoil for the better part of a year. Please, tell me more about how much time and experience matter when it comes to developing great games. By this measure, Ubisoft's open-world games should be untouchable masterpieces by now with how many games that they've been making. The controversies surrounding both games prove a lack of vision and accountability. Jealous developers
That's definitely true. I think it's a huge issue that a lot of the games have is that they don't have a real, like, there's no internal creative locus of direction. There's no, compass that's pointing them to their North Star and, we're going, this is what we're trying to make, right? I think a lot of times you see these games that are trying to, like, capitalize on trends, and then by the time the game comes out, the trend has been irrelevant for 2 years.
That people talked about their games the way that they've been talking about Elden Ring and Baldur's Gate 3, but the biggest value that we received as players from this conversation was the transparent realization that these studios and developers genuinely do not understand the wants and needs of players the same as our newfound kings in FromSoft and Larian.
I think that they do understand it, and that's why they're mad. They absolutely understand it. I don't think they're stupid. It's just that they're selfish.
Crazy. When you start to look back at some of these older conversations, you realize why the games industry is in the position it's in today. And you look at all these developers.
Lazy, yeah. Well, it's not even necessarily lazy. I think what happens with a lot of these really big studios is what he was saying a minute ago about how, like, accountability gets displaced between so many people that when something goes wrong, it's nobody's fault or it's everybody's fault. So there's never an actual point where a person can be held accountable for a bad outcome because those bad outcomes are shared by so many other people that you can never really fix problems.
That are caught in the trap of thinking about things like
that's like a bureaucratic issue, right?
Graphics,
like
and
management,
huge scope, and overbloated UIs when all of those things are serving to do is increase their budgets and bleed their profits. No wonder these guys have low expectations for future.
Yeah, you have a UI designer. You have like all this other bullshit like Fidelity. Like these people, it's like there's like a principle to this that the amount of time that it takes to do the work will be extended based off of the amount of time that's given, right? So like if you give somebody 10 minutes to do something, they'll do it in 10 minutes. But if you give somebody 30 minutes to do something, they'll do it in 30 minutes. I think that's what happens with these budgets. They just make bigger and bigger games, like Goldfish.
Projections of the industry. I wonder where that's coming from.
Water physics
designer. The funny thing is that none of those things have anything to do with the reason why Baldur's Gate 3 or Elden Ring were successful games. 5 seconds of scrolling social media is going to show you why players like those games.
And it's obvious.
And it's pretty simple. They're just good games. They're enjoyable. In Baldur's Gate 3's case, it was just the ability to genuinely have real choice in a video game. In Elden Ring, it's just a damn good game.
I hate how it's like, bro, like there's so many games that you can pick your dialogue option and it's just like the character responds to what you said and then it just continues the story normally.
And these opinions that these guys throw out there just go to show that they're not playing these games, and they're not playing these games with the eye of a player. They're playing it with the eye of somebody that's making their own game, and you need to change that perspective. You want to know how to make a game as successful and as incredible as Elden Ring? Well, you have unyielding vision on what you believe players want to play, what you yourself want to play. And Miyazaki reveals that to us now. In a recent newsletter from The Guardian, Miyazaki gives his thoughts on game design and the current state of the video game industry. The Guardian writes, the famously challenging dark fantasy epic Elden Ring was the world's second best-selling game in 2022.
I think that the fact that so many journalists and game designers talk about the difficulty of Dark Souls and From Software games, it indicates to me that they have a fundamental misunderstanding of why people play video games. Because, like, they see game hard equals good. That's not the way it works. That was never the way it worked. But if you don't understand anything about games, that's what you would think. It's about overcoming challenges. It's about having a game that gives you the autonomy to solve problems that the game presents to you in creative ways. That's the reasons why these games are successful and why they're good. The difficulty of the game is not really a factor. It is in a way, but it's like an abstract factor of what that difficulty, like the gameplay that difficulty necessitates. Not necessarily the difficulty itself.
And the release of its expansion, Shadow of the Erd Tree, last Friday once again has everyone arguing about whether it's too difficult. Every single FromSoft developed game since 2009
and they already nerfed it. I think it's fine after the nerf. I've been watching people play the game. Holy fuck, it was bigger than I thought. Especially those early bosses. Oh my god.
Souls has inspired this discourse,
like
and I'm not going to get into it because it's neither interesting nor particularly consequential. These games are what they are, and you can either get on board or, quite justifiably, walk away. The vision is passed down from the game's director, Hidetaka Miyazaki, also president of FromSoft since 2014, having made his and the developer's name with Dark Souls in 2011. It's harsh, sure, but there's also an element of faith and encouragement in this approach to game design. Elden Ring and his other games trust that if you just persevere and call on other players for help, you'll triumph eventually, and it'll feel all the sweeter.
Yeah, it's like basically the game puts a wall in front of you, and you have to decide whether you want to climb over the wall, whether you want to dig under the wall, or whether you want to just get your head and just... And eventually you'll break through. You guys watch me play. That's what I do. That's the reason why the game is good. It's not good because it's hard. Like that's just it's like that's like the most surface level understanding of why these games are popular.
Miyazaki is an interesting character and one of the most influential artists in games and indeed entertainment. He made Time Magazine's 100 Most Influential People last year. I interviewed him in 2010, shortly before the release of Demon's Souls in Europe, and following his career has been one of the highlights of mine. I interviewed him again in Los Angeles recently, and it might comfort some to know that playing his games is sometimes torturous for him too. Leading up to the release of a game, I'll be very hands-on playing it and getting as much time on it as possible, he said. But after the release, I tend not to want to touch it, because I know that I'm either going to find things I left on the table or issues that will bug me. And once I become a player, I am powerless to do anything significant to change it. So once a game is out in the wild, I tend not to play it. But in preparation for Shadow of the Erdtree, I played through the main story of Elden Ring. I want to preface this by saying I absolutely suck at video games, so my approach or playstyle is to use everything at my disposal, all the assistance, every scrap of aid that the game offers, and also all the knowledge I have as the architect of the game. The freedom...
There's a lot of ways to beat bosses that you would never even think of. So I'll give you an example in Dark Souls 1. Capra Demon is a motherfucker. He's a huge piece of shit. Oh my god, I hate that boss, right? It's the worst. But when you go past Capra Demon, down the stairs, and then up the stairs, and you go into that pipe, there's a vendor that sells you dung pies. And if you stand in the right place, you can throw the dung pies over the wall for the Capra Demon and infect him with toxin and kill him without even having to fight him. That's right. That was not intended, though. If it wasn't intended, they would have fixed it. And also, this is what I believe. I think that games that are incredibly well designed have serendipitous outcomes that make the game better with things that were not intended. Two examples of this are getting world buffs in Classic WoW and wave dashing in Smash Bros. Melee. Truly good games, you will discover more and more good things about the good games, and truly bad games, you will discover more and more bad things about the bad games.
An open world nature of Elden Ring perhaps lowers the barrier of entry, and I might be the one who's benefiting the most from that as a player more than anyone else. Man, I love this interview, and I think it highlights something seemingly lost in games today. How many times have you asked yourself or thought to yourself whether or not the developers actually play the games that they make?
I've thought about that before. Yes.
FromSoft makes challenging games. However, Miyazaki wouldn't put the player through something if he hadn't experienced it firsthand himself. To make sure that it's enjoyable, engaging, or not too impossible.
See, that's the thing that Diablo 3 had. That's what made the people that did the Diablo 3 Inferno, like, that's what made them stupid. is like they couldn't even beat the bosses. Like, I guarantee you, do you think that a team of people in Blizzard actually beat Acranius, pre-nerf, and Sunken Temple? Do you think that at any given point in time, they played with actual characters that resulted in a boss kill of that boss? Because I don't think the answer is yes. I think that they're not. The Act 2 Wasps, yeah, exactly. And so these people just don't play their game. That's the issue. And so they don't understand what the problems are. And that's why, for example, like, a lot of these games are fucking easy, right? And the reason why is because the developers aren't good enough. They're not good enough at the games to make them hard. They're not good enough to make them hard in a fun way. So their idea of hard is like, oh, this is nightmare mode. What happens is that the mobs do more damage and they have a lot of health. Okay.
Miyazaki being the worst Souls player while being the architect and visionary behind these games. Elden Ring is one of the very few games that I can point out and say the devs have played this a lot. And there are two things that I believe proves this. Respawn Stakes of America and the lack of microtransactions. Respawning at Stakes of America save the long runbacks to optional boss encounters or wherever you last died.
Any boss encounter. Like, running back to Smelter Demon was really bad. It was so fucking annoying. And then they were like, you know what else is harder with the blue Smelter Demon? The run back. That's also harder. Fuck you. And that's what it was. Sir Alone. Yeah, exactly. It was so awful. Yeah, Bed of Chaos. Right, exactly. And do you want to know why those runbacks weren't as bad back then? Because the bosses were easier. Like, you're not complaining about the Bed of Chaos run back because it's a one or two shot boss. It's a joke boss. Who cares? So, like, as soon as you figure it out, it's not a big deal. But you make a hard boss, and then you have to run back to that over and over. Now you're mad.
That far away from your last site of grace. It's a subtle quality of life improvement, but it's necessary in a game like Elden Ring. Why do you think it exists? Likely because Miyazaki got tired of running back to where he died over and over again.
He's doing it wrong.
It's something that would have only been realized through experience.
Well, it's not even that. It's that the way that it was designed beforehand was in the function of bosses that were pretty hard. Or sorry, pretty easy. Like, all of the bosses in like Dark Souls 1 are pretty easy. And the bosses that are really hard have really easy runbacks. Like Manus, like, yeah, there's that one bitch that can shoot the purple thing at you. And then for like Dark Souls 3, like Midir is very easy to run back to. Gale is very easy to run back to. Nameless King, you spawn right in front of him. So like, the reason why the runbacks aren't a problem in those older games, but they are more in like the other games, is because the bosses are way harder. ONS runback is terrible? No, it wasn't. You just roll one attack. Get the fuck out of here. Stop being bad.
Why does FromSoft not have microtransactions in their game? Because no self-respecting player and developer would sit and play a game and think, you know what's missing here? A way to be able to rip off the players rather than reward them for actually enjoying the game. I'm sure they'd love that. Sure, they could earn this set of armor by killing this unique NPC after a hidden quest line, but I think they'd rather buy it. You know,
They'd rather get it as a pre-order bonus.
I actually bet good money that the vast majority of some of the best quality of life features that we've seen in games likely came from developers playing their game through the eyes of a player extensively, exhaustingly.
That's exactly what it is. That's exactly what it is. Yeah, people play it, they're like, this is bad. Okay, let's change it. Problem solved.
Even. I realize that quality of life
I think that video games would be a lot better now if microtransactions never got more popular. Because I think that microtransactions have led designers to make games inconvenient. Like, the First Descendant. How about, let's talk about that. New game just recently came out. There are all of these like weird, stupid things that you have to do to get different resources to upgrade your characters, like for prestiging materials. And farming them is very convoluted and annoying. However, you can buy them on the store. You just simply spend real money, you buy the currency, and then you buy the item directly with no limit. That's the way it works. So If the game didn't have that buyable option, I bet that the prestige items would be differently obtained. And I think that's where the problem is. It's that the games are being, like, you're basically being given ankle weights, and then you have to pay money to take them off. And that's the real reason why I think microtransactions are extremely, it's a word, like, toxic, right? Like, it's hostile to players. Because you're actively hurting the player in order to make them give you money. Game designers don't want that. We get forced into doing this stupid shit. I understand that. But what I'm saying is that I don't really care about whose fault it is. I'm just saying that the game is providing me this experience and I don't like it. I don't care whose fault it is. Like the designer, the publisher, the director, the developer, the fucking... I don't care. The game has this problem.
They're the flashiest of video game design philosophies, but at the end of the day, it has an immeasurable effect on a player's experience while playing a game. Seriously, it's immeasurable. The vast majority of players aren't even going to notice when a quality of life feature isn't in place. Sometimes they'll call it out. They'll see another game that has something and point to the game they're playing and
Think about what happened when everybody moved over to Final Fantasy XIV and they saw all of the better features that WoW simply refused to have. Like, I can't raid in WoW anymore because of how much of a waste of time it is. And I didn't realize how much time I was wasting until I played Final Fantasy XIV.
Hey, why isn't that here? But more times than not, they're just going to have this general feeling of unease and frustration because the game isn't providing them with conveniences that it should. Best example of this I can give is playing a survival game. The first survival game that I played that allowed me to be able to craft out of my storage rather than just only out of my personal inventory felt like a life-changing experience.
Yeah, it's like you go back and you play Valheim without that, and it's like, I'm trying to think even, what could I even say? Like, it sucks. It just sucks dick. Like, that's it. It's not fun. Like, Pow World had it enshrouded, you unlock it. I didn't like that, but at least you can get it somehow. From now on, if you can't craft from the items inside of your base and you have to actually take them out of your inventory and use them, I will consider that a dysfunction of the game because of how annoying it is. That's it. It's just fucking annoying.
Whoever was the one that designed the magic storage mod for Terraria, you're a saint. Look, it should be a requirement to play your own games. And I think the vast majority of developers that are out there do actually play their games. But I don't think that they're playing their games from the eyes or from the perspective of a player. They don't have that same level of empathy that's necessary to be able to understand what players are going to do. Think about how players are actually going to experience something. More times than not, they're probably hopping in there just to test what they put in.
Yeah.
They're working, after all. They clocked in.
See if it works.
They're working.
Exactly.
So they're just there to test what they're doing, make sure it works, and then move on. And it takes a really high level of leadership and wisdom to be able to hand down the idea of trying to play the game as a player rather than just constantly be testing it. And that leadership is something it's just not in this industry right now. The interview continues. I was greatly amused by the image of Miyazaki, controller in hand, torment.
Is that true? I think that's probably true. Yeah, I would agree with him. Yeah, Yoshi P, because like if they don't understand the way the game plays, then they're never going to be able to solve the problems. Like, that's why I think that if you watch a developer play a game for 5 minutes, or like if you have a developer play a game, like give them an hour of uncut raw footage of them playing their own game, and that will explain most of the problems with that game. It will. That'll explain it. There it is. Yep, the Final Fantasy 16 dev. Yep, exactly, right?
By the very world he wrought and all its imperfections, which only he would notice. That's true commitment to his game design philosophy of improvement through failure, a creed that seems to permeate his whole life. Miyazaki is a hands-on director, and all his games bear an unmistakable imprint of his influence. But he has also been attempting to pass down his knowledge and artistic approach to others at From Software in the 10 years that he's been its president, ensuring that they too have the room to fail.
Yeah, that's like an important component, is that like obviously Miyazaki is great, but there are probably a lot of other guys at From Software, we don't know their names, that are also putting in, probably realistically like 80, 60-hour work weeks to make sure that these games come out, and they're working their fucking ass off.
Budgets, scale, scope, everything has grown to the point where room for failure isn't tolerated as much as I think it was in the past, he told me. FromSoft has its own way of hedging risks, so to speak, in that most of our projects have a partner who's financing the project. From a business management perspective, we're not betting everything on one single project. At the same time, you have to find the right project to allow for failure, whether it's smaller in scope or scale or a small module of something bigger. There has to be.
And here's a really great example of like Bandai Namco being able to do that and contextualize that. Is Armored Core was never going to be even probably 50% as successful as Elden Ring, even in the best case scenario. And Bandai Namco and From Software knew that. And they even said, because they were, this is an interview from like last year, right? They were like, we're really happy with Armored Core. Armored Core did amazing. We made this, small slice of content that is extremely good for this audience of people, and they loved it, and we're going to make more content. So, like, you don't, like, every single game doesn't have to be Elden Ring level of success in order for it to be fun. Like, there's a lot of games that are, like, more niche games that are amazing. Like, just the amount of sales of a game doesn't necessarily mean the game is, like, just better.
Room for that. I think that's where a lot of young game developers will be challenged and will be able to learn from it.
Yeah.
Making sure you understand and identify where those pockets of failure can be allowed is how we try to grow our talent.
Yep.
Miyazaki views Elden Ring as a turning point for From Software. Before and after Elden Ring,
I always I try to do that with people as much as I can too. Is like, if I don't like telling people what to do. So if I can give somebody the opportunity to fuck up and then learn why I want it done this other way, then you should do that. Because people will never learn in the same way. Like, you can tell them something, but if you let them experience it themselves, that's totally different.
To be a clear difference. You could see that in 2023's
really
mech game Armored Core 6, I would say. He hopes that we will soon be seeing from other game directors at the company, not just himself. Where FromSoft is right now in terms of scale, I would say Elden Ring is really the limit.
I'm not surprised. Like, Elden Ring is such a huge game. Like, I don't think you could ask for something bigger than Elden Ring. It's so huge. Like, yeah, just do another one of those.
Tapped every resource and talent we have access to, scaling it even bigger. I have my concerns. Perhaps having multiple projects is the next stage, where some of the other young talent can have the opportunity to manage and direct game design for a smaller project.
Yeah.
Man, what I love about Miyazaki's perspective here is that it goes directly against the plans and perspective of most of the AAA industry's leaders. If we
Which is make Elden Ring 2, make Elden Ring Mobile, make Elden Ring, for Switch, make Elden Ring for tablet, add in Elden Ring 3, Elden Ring pre-order bonuses, Elden Ring Immortal. Yeah, it's just, oh my God.
Time to look around the industry and look at different games that are being developed right now. We can easily point out ones and say, so what happens if that game fails? Dragon Age and EA as an example, a game that's been in development for 10 years now, going through multiple iterations, redesigns, and identity changes, something that isn't a surefire hit anymore as they've chose to reimagine what a Dragon Age game is, vaulting strategic...
It's like, look at how pathetic and fucking trash this looks like to Elden Ring. Like, look at this, and then look at this. This is a joke. You know what the funny thing is? This game's probably going to be more expensive. Like, and like, whenever you really see the side-by-side, you realize how bad things really are. Like, I didn't realize it until right now. This is astonishing. This is trash. Wow.
Combat and the darker themes the games used to have, trying to eye a more modern audience, obviously. A dangerous gamble, to say the least, when the games that were last released by this studio were Mass Effect Andromeda and Anthem. When the games industry seeks to scale itself infinitely, no wonder you have industry layoffs en masse. PlayStation, Spider-Man 2 as another example. $300 million to make, tripling the budget of Spider-Man 2018, only to sell the game to the same amount of players. The game's profits are now getting closer to the black than in the green.
It's actually the black is good. That's just the way balance sheets are, right? But or the metaphor. But it doesn't really matter, right? I mean, it still means the same thing. Yeah, the red is bad. But either way, the point is still there. You're right. Yeah, you triple the budget to sell the game to the same audience. Yeah, you probably made a bad decision there. Absolutely.
All of this infinite scaling for fidelity, scope, and design, these bobblehead CEOs scale their projects and their projections the same as the game. And it's just
I don't even think it's the CEOs. I think that projects and teams have I think that they have just a propensity to just keep growing, right? It's the same as like a planet will like just naturally attract like moons or like things to orbit around it through gravity. I think that the bigger a studio gets and the bigger a team gets, the bigger it gets, right? It's like a snowball effect where it's like you're just getting more and more and more people. And like I've seen this happen in many cases. This is how, for example, Elon Musk can buy Twitter, fire 80% of the people, and the user experience barely changes. I'm sorry, but yeah, there might be more bots now. It's like not really quite the same. But if you fire 80% of the people and the product is 5% worse, I think you probably made a good decision.
Realistic. Knowing your limit before you reach it is an incredible act of humility on the part of FromSoft and Miyazaki. EA, Activision...
Yeah, I like Twitter better now. I think it's been improved.
Ubisoft, you know for a fact that if they had a game that was as successful as Elden Ring, they would be rushing to make the next version of it. Make it bigger, spend more, and expect better results.
Yeah, just keep upping the ante until it flops and then the studio dies.
You know, but that's just not how games work. And I think it's something that's rarely recognized in games today. If we look around the industry and we see all the different iterations on a lot of these titles, the first, the fourth, the fifth, or the 50th when it comes to Call of Duty, it's a crapshoot whether or not you're going to be able to retain the audience that you've already had, find more, find a new audience, or even retain most of the players that you had previously. And you can't keep pouring money into something thinking that you're going to get the same or better results. That's a major gamble. And that's what's really beautiful about the words of Miyazaki is that he says we don't bet everything on one single game, one single project, nor should you. And I think a lot of studios that are out there do, and that's one of the reasons why so many people have been losing their jobs.
I think that with a lot of studios, that's just what you have to do, right? I mean, Larian bet it all on Baldur's Gate 3. They absolutely did. So it's not necessarily a bad decision to do that. I think the problem is whenever you're not able to like adapt the product and it stays stagnant. That's where the real issue is.
And what's really incredible about the success of Elden Ring and Baldur's Gate 3 is that players are going to be coming back to buy these games, not because they're looking for Baldur's Gate 4, not because they're looking for Elden Ring 2, but because they want to play a FromSoft game, because they want to play a Larian Studios game.
This is something that used to be true with Blizzard. Is like, I played Overwatch because it was made by Blizzard. I played Diablo 3 because it was made by Blizzard. I never played Diablo 2. And like game studios used to be so good that you would buy a game based off of that or based off of a franchise. Like, oh, a new Command and Conquer came out. Well, it's going to be good. It's Command and Conquer. Of course I'm going to play it. It's not even a question.
Something that's been lost. There are studios that players are still doing that with today, but that used to be a lot of these industry leaders. I remember the days where I used to look up, oh man, it's an Activision game. I know that's going to be a banger.
Exactly. Yeah, that was a long time ago.
Oh, it's going to be an EA game. That's going to be a solid game. But we don't think that way anymore because these studios and these leadership of these...
Well, we do think that way. It's just we're not thinking that way about Activision. Like, we're talking about thinking that way about From Software. Like, it very clearly, it's still the case. And, like, I would even say, like, a new Legend of Zelda game or a new Final Fantasy, like a numbered Final Fantasy game, like, whenever Final Fantasy 17 comes out, I'm going to play it because it's Final Fantasy 17. Like, there it is. So that still exists. It's just that a lot of companies have burned that goodwill.
Companies has gotten so far away from the player that they don't even recognize what we look like anymore. Now, closing out the interview, Miyazaki mentioned something that's rather interesting, saying that this is the end of Elden Ring for now, but also that he wouldn't mind seeing what someone else could do with the lands between in a different medium. I don't see any reason to deny another interpretation or adaptation of Elden Ring, a movie, for example, he told me. But I don't think myself or From Software have the knowledge or ability to produce something in a different medium. So that's where a very strong partner would have to come into play.
That's what Riot did with Arcane, and it definitely paid off. Arcane was massively successful.
To build a lot of trust and agreement on whatever it is we're trying to achieve, but there's interest for sure. Now,
I'm very much not like I think with games like Elden Ring is more anime than anime. So don't fucking make this live action. I feel like most live action fantasy stuff is garbage.
Love the idea of an Elden Ring TV show or movie. I think the only one that's capable of doing it justice would be Peter Jackson. I mean, basically, you're going to need something Elden Ring level to be able to compete with Elden Ring.
Guillermo del Toro could make an incredible Elden Ring movie. I think it would go so fucking hard. Oh my god. It would be disgusting how good that could be.
A real takeaway is Miyazaki saying, "We are done." And FromSoft deserves to say that. Near the beginning of this video, I brought up how it requires unyielding vision to make a game as great as Elden Ring. And that relentless vision and identity of who and what From Software is as a studio and what games they aim to make is the real wake-up call for this industry. I want you to keep in mind that players and reviewers lamented about the game's difficulty at launch, and even now again with the DLC. Just recently, Bandai Namco responded to the players telling them to just go level up their Scaducery blessings.
Well, yeah, and they buffed it, so it's fixed, right? It's fucking fine. It's fine. Like, people get mad about this shit. It's like, yeah, and to be fair, like, I think, for example, I think the Ghost Flame Dragon, I think this fight sucks. I think it's a shit fight. I think Elden Ring really fucked up with, like, the damage multipliers for dragons. Because the most effective way to fight dragons is standing under their feet and hitting them. And I think that they should have done the damage multipliers like Midir instead, where hitting the head was so much more advantageous that you were stupid not to. Personally.
Sure, there's going to be some day one balancing or performance issues. FromSoft doesn't run around trying to save face. They just continue to work and give the game time to breathe. Players love the feel of playing a FromSoft game because they don't resort to the now standardized practices of hand-holding that much of the industry relies on. They are going to lead...
Do you want to know why the games rely on hand-holding? This is going to be kind of something that I don't know if people agree with this or not. I think that you need hand-holding whenever you don't have time to design a game well enough to teach it intuitively. I think the reason why they have that hand-holding is because they can't design the game well enough to communicate those ideas without them being overtly stated. It's another reason why hand-holding games are bad. It's because if you can't design a game to where people can play it and enjoy the way it's played, then guess what? You probably can't design a good game either.
You through the
it's
game
a crutch. Yeah, it's a crutch for bad game design. It's the same as like yellow paint and shit like that. Like, you don't need to have yellow paint in Elden Ring because it's fucking obvious.
FromSoft's expectations is that you, as a player, will play the game, and they trust that you are going to have the ability to find solutions to challenges and use the tools provided on your own.
Yeah.
There's something to be said about having faith in the players. I've said this in the past or in previous videos, but leadership
having faith for the players is like... It's not even necessarily having faith for the players. It's about giving the players the tools to solve the problems themselves. Because, like, there are some games that should have had hand-holding. Like, for example, First Descendant. There is no intuitive reason why a player would know that there are 3 different ball mechanics that visually look the same, but have 3 different types of design. For example, there's a ball mechanic where all the balls need to die at the same time. There's a ball mechanic where they need to die in the order that they were spawned in. And there's a ball mechanic where there are rotating invulnerability fields on the balls and they just need to die, period. A normal player would not be able to intuit that design. However, if you compare that to Monster Hunter, if you hit the boss's tail, then the tail comes off. And then the attack that it does with the tail doesn't hit you because it doesn't have a tail. It's obvious. Bad signposting? Yeah, it's just badly designed.
really what's lacking in most of the games industry. When I look at a game like Elden Ring, when I play a game like Elden Ring, I can feel its respect for the audience. I can feel like I'm playing a game that's made for me. And that's a rare feeling outside of a few select releases and indie games.
That's a huge factor. Like, I'm going to be honest, like, I feel like a lot of games that come out now, I am not the target audience for those games. Like, I'll look at, like, the way the characters talk, like, the story, it's just fucking, like, garbage and cringe. It's so annoying.
Games today. Why is it so rare? Because the vast majority of the industry doesn't have the presidents and CEOs of their companies being people that worked as directors or developers of their games. There is less vertical promotions and more outside hiring. As the video game
industry, who used to be really good at like inside hiring and like, you know, growing developers was Blizzard. Blizzard used to be huge with this.
Begins to fuse with the entertainment and tech industry, placing all of these different marketing minds and career CEOs into these positions of leadership. There is a unique insight that's lost that only comes while working in the trenches, that customers aren't just customers, they're players. You're not selling a product, you're selling an experience. Experiences have identities. They can't be made for everyone. And you have to be okay with serving a target audience.
That's the other big issue, is that games that are made, quote, for everyone end up being watered down and so garbage that nobody wants to play them. And I think the reason actually why they make games, quote, for everyone is because making a game for everyone can create a target audience that they can maybe make their $100 million back from. That's the real reason. It's because they have to paint with such a, a broad brush or like cast such a wide net because of how much money they spent on the game. So they can't afford to cater to an audience because of how many people they need to sell this game to.
And not trying to grow your audience infinitely. More games today are released with a lack of identity. More leadership is questioning how to make more money, and their only response is to appeal to a wider audience. However, the broader that audience, the more diluted that experience, and the less likely you are to make a game that leaves a lasting impact on players. You have to be okay with leaving some of them behind. We crave impact. We crave game studios.
Yeah, there's plenty of games that like they come out and they're not super great. And it's like, okay, I'm just not really interested in this game. It's okay. It's like a lot of people didn't play Armored Core 6, but for the people that did, they enjoyed it a lot. And like that's how you build like your base of players.
Those in games that have an identity, a unique experience that we know that we can only get from that one studio. The more watered down your games become, the less recognizable they are. Players know when they're playing a FromSoft game because only FromSoft makes games like theirs.
Well, it's because it's good, right? I mean, that's the reason why. I don't think people really care about that, but it's just that other games that are like Elden Ring, there are a lot of these games, even the really good ones, where there's like certain just like fucky behavior. I don't know how I can describe this in a good way. Basically, the way the game is designed, there are a lot of like weaknesses in like how the characters interact with the mobs. There's like bugs, right? It's janky. It's like you have like Inotria. Like I like the game, but the attacks did not even feel 10% as good as they do in Elden Ring. They just didn't. It wasn't the same.
That's why they had the ability to release Armored Core 6, selling almost 3 million copies in a month and a half after its release, whereas Armored Core 5 only sold 400,000 copies.
Jesus.
FromSoft has a reputation. FromSoft has integrity. FromSoft knows their players. You know, still to this day, I vividly remember the first time that I played Demon's Souls. Right when it first came out, played it on PS3, and I remember sitting there thinking, this is the first time I've played a game where it felt like my imagination just spilled out onto the screen. Whether it was some of the older anime that I had watched or Berserk or whatever it might be, it was my imagination realized. It was the first game.
I felt that way playing Dark Souls 1. I felt like I was playing a game that I grew up with. Because like nowadays, I think that there are so many immersion breaks that games have. Like, oh, you open up the game and then there's like an advertisement for joining a Discord, or there's a, battle pass promotion or something like that. Whereas whenever you open up Dark Souls 1, there it says start game, load game, settings, and an exit game. That's it, right? And I think that That's one thing that a lot of people miss out on, because all of those little things inside of games make them less immersive. And I'm not saying every game has to be immersive, but the older games remind me of when that was the norm.
That I felt was the closest to perfection that any game had ever been before. And the reason why, and this is something that took years to be able to kind of figure out, is that even after all the different Souls games, Bloodborne, Elden Ring, there's a certain level of sincerity in their game design.
Yeah.
They know what they're trying to make. They know who they're making it for. And they know themselves what kind of games they like. And some of that does come down to knowing that you're going to end up turning off a wider audience. And you have to be okay with that. You have to be able to prepare for yourself and be able to
Well, the thing is, like, Elden Ring was intended for a massively wide audience. Like, I don't really think that's even entirely true. Like, Elden Ring was a pretty easy game in a lot of cases. Like, even the DLC is easy if you know everything about the game. Like, I know, like, 80%, 70% of the stuff in Elden Ring. The game's fucking easy to me, because I know all of the different ways to solve problems. So the idea that, like, making a game challenging that doesn't have an I win button easy mode is like, that makes it inaccessible, I think that's ridiculous. Because those types of people never gave a shit. You mean to cheese? Well, yeah, of course. Absolutely, yeah, there are a lot of tools and I can use that and I win. Absolutely. If From Software truly cared about its players, they would announce Sekiro 2. Yeah.
prepare your company for those kind of things. And that's one of the things that he brings up, where he's talking about how they, prepare themselves for failure, because they don't know if things are going to work, but they know who they're trying to make that game for, and that's the most important thing. Helldivers 2 CEO had said it best before: a game for everyone is a game for no one. Yeah. And I think that Elden Ring proves that there is a wide audience, a massive audience for games that have a strong identity, know what they are, but can still be able to make themselves a little bit more accessible. Sure, it may not be as hard or as difficult as some other Souls games that are out there, but it's a game that proves that
it's not about being hard, bro. Like, that's why I always that's why I kept I kept talking about this with Elden Ring. And that was my criticism. Like, I criticized the DLC because I was worried that, From Software would start designing the game. And I guess we'll have to see whenever they make the next version of that, right? Don't start designing the game for people that have played every single other game. Because at that point, that means that you narrowed down your target audience. And now it's only meant for those people. But I think the reason why Elden Ring was so great and why I thought it was such a huge success is that From Software had an audience of people that had probably played every single one of the games that they had made, and they knew every boss and every mechanic, and they could have made Elden Ring 5 times harder. Absolutely. And those people still would have played the game, and they probably would have liked it as much. But they made Elden Ring accessible to new players, and I think that was incredible. Because what happened, think about with WoW. WoW, now they just make the dungeons and the raids harder and harder and harder, because they're appealing to a player base that's so good that those players keep getting better at the game, whereas the average players stay the same because they're cycling in and out. These are people that still only have 10 hours of gameplay. Yeah, they lost the plot. Yeah, and Elden Ring did not do that. And I think that was one of the big reasons why it was so successful. It's because it was accessible. This idea that games need to have an easy mode to be accessible is ridiculous.
Have an idea of the audience that you're trying to make a game for. Sometimes it can reach even higher than that. Mm-hmm. That game has to be sincere. That game has to have an identity. And Elden Ring does.
Yeah, it does.
From Software does. And I feel like that's probably the biggest wake-up call of all.
Yeah.
Is that the vast majority of the industry just doesn't seem to have much of an identity anymore. I don't know who they're making games for. They're making games for everybody, but not everybody's going to play these games. Hell, not everybody even plays games to begin with.
And does Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom, they don't have difficulty sliders, do they? It's not like you start the game and you choose easy or hard, right? No. But I guarantee you that if I played one of those games, I would play it on easy mode. Because I bet that there are ways that you can solve problems in that game that are creative, that make the game a lot easier. Absolutely.
Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thank you guys for watching this long. you guys did watch the video, think about liking, subscribing, sharing the video to everybody else.
That's a good video.
And just hit 80,000 subscribers. It's only been a year, a little over a year since I started making videos, so that's wild, actually. That's wild. So, yay me. Pats on the back. Claps for you guys for joining. Thank you so much. I guess it's the road to 100K. Let's give me that check mark and the silver play button.
Oh, yeah.
I'll put it like there.
Maybe
I'll put it right there.
Yeah.
But it'll always be here.
Aw.
Anyway, stay cool, stay righteous, stay safe, my friends. I will see you guys in the lands of shadow. I need to go play some more Elden Ring. Peace.
It's actually crazy how good that game is. Like, I like once a week, if not once a day recently, because of the DLC, I would think about Elden Ring and how good the game is. And about how, like, how is it possible that this game was made nowadays? Yeah, same, exactly. And it's like, I think that giving players tools to solve problems is so much more fulfilling than giving players sliders to solve problems. And a lot of games now, like, they need to have hand-holding because they can't design the game to be intuitive. They have to make easy modes and hard modes because they can't teach the player how to play the game or motivate the player to get better at the game. It's like whenever you really think back and you view these things through a different lens, you can see how a lot of these newer games, the reason why they have these problems is completely self-inflicted. It's because they don't really know what they're doing. And yeah, it's more HP. Like, dude, I'm gonna be honest. Like, this Dragon Quest video, man, I felt like I was watching a phone game. Like, I did. Like, look at this, and look at this. It's like it's a fucking phone game, man. It's not even remotely close. Yeah, Dragon Quest has my view. Yeah, it's just awful. What are your thoughts on the DLC? I thought the DLC was good. I think that some of the bosses are like super aggressive, but they already, like, the thing is, the change they made with the tree buffs, I think it did a lot. Because, like, I've watched people play Elden Ring, and I feel like people are taking, like, especially early on, they're taking like 30% less damage. It was huge. A DLC raised the fucking bar? Yeah, bro. Absolutely. It was like a third the size of the base game. Nearing being the DLC a second time, having collected everything, I'm finding myself wishing that there was more and hoping for more. Well, there will be. There'll be mods that'll come out and they'll augment the game and add more of that. Do you prefer Elden Ring over Sekiro? I do. I like it more. It's not like this is a personal opinion, and like I like games that are puzzles, and I feel like Elden Ring to me is like a puzzle, and Sekiro is more like a dance, where it's like in Sekiro I have to do the thing, and Elden Ring I can do a lot of different things, and I like being able to solve problems that way. Yeah, both are amazing games. Yeah, exactly. I enjoyed watching Elden Ring boss tier list. Oh yeah. I do the boss tier list for DLC. I already did, actually. Tears of the Kingdom has puzzles too. It's way more than a third. Base game has 15 remembrances. DLC has 10 plus Bale. Really? Fuck. Maybe you're right. Yeah. I mean, some of the bosses in the DLC, to be fair, are like they're just added old bosses. But still, I don't know, man. I still think it's pretty good. Like, the DLC is massive. It's like a third to half. Yeah, it's really, really big. Has done the expansion-sized DLC on console before with the PS1 with the original Armored Core. Yeah, I never played the original ones besides that. I was in New Game 6. I was pissed. It was more difficult. Should have felt overpowered. Yeah, but you're in New Game 6, right? I mean, that's kind of what you get. I mean, you do that. That's just the way it's going to be. Standing with a Great Shield is not solving. It's cheating. If you think that's cheating, then get ready for me to play it again with a new build. And if you think that's cheating, after that, I'm going to play it again with a new build after that. And it's going to be even worse. Bro, like, that's what I do, man. Because to me, like, it sounds weird, but if I beat the game in the way that the game developer intended, I don't feel good about beating the game. Because I feel like I am a robot that has just been trained to perform a function. So, like, dodging every attack perfectly and playing really well doesn't matter to me. I don't care about that. Because, like, it's just a game, and like I don't care about being good at the game. But I do like the problem-solving aspect of it, and that's what motivates me more. Using a shield isn't intended? I don't think that they intended it to be that good. I don't think that they thought it would be that good. And I guess we'll find out, right?